What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to Red King Reacts, and welcome back to part 2 of Forgive Me, Father. I haven't posted it yet. I will post it, though. I will post it, I promise. So let's get to this video.
As we sat in silence, we were focused only on the task at hand.
Okay.
Diego pulled the truck off the road before we reached the lot and steered us behind some bushes that ran along the back of the cemetery. From where we were, we should have been totally out of sight from the church. "Ready?" Diego asked. "Ready to keep your cool? You know this asshole is the bad guy, right? You don't have a sister, but try to imagine hearing stuff like this about yours. We don't even know if it's true. We do, though. It's just talk. That slimy guy talked enough at the barbecue, and he'll talk again when he feels this blade on his throat." I looked out through the shrubs and towards the fading yellow bricks of the church. "Remember the rules," I said. "No killing. Don't use anything that will leave a trace or knock something to the floor." Diego turned around and started rummaging under the back seats. "Anything else?" he said from over his shoulder. "Just wait for the proof." Diego returned from the back with 2 black masks, along with 2 sets of black gloves to match. He also had a choice of weapons: 2 crowbars, 3 rusty old knives that he probably found in his parents' garage, and a massive pair of bolt cutters you would need both hands to use. He even had an old potato sack to choke him out. I held my breath as I looked over them. "I'm serious about this," he said. "Consider this your proof." We moved slowly at first. We crouched, carefully placing each step in the dirt like they were watchmen on patrol. We ducked behind crumbling tombstones, picnic tables, and any obstacle along our path until we reached the back doors. We paused below the rectangular-shaped window they connected. It was covered with a thin, transparent curtain that could easily be seen through from the other side. I reached up and gently tested the handle to see if they'd been left unlocked.
Fuck me dead, man.
They had been. And why wouldn't they? Who would suspect anyone trying to break inside a church less than an hour after Mass had ended? It took us a little while before we felt confident that no one had noticed us, and slowly brought our heads up to peek inside.
Shit.
Lee was right in our crosshairs, directly in front of us in the main lobby. Seeing him so immediately was so startling I nearly toppled back. He couldn't have been more than 20 feet away. Broom in hand, he swept towards a pile of dust and debris in the middle of the hall.
Fuck.
His head was down. Whenever he turned enough to one side, I could see his expression was serious, like something was on his mind that wasn't cleaning up. Diego pointed to the near wall. Leaning against it were a couple of church posters, a mop he'd probably used after sweeping, and the 2 collections baskets he'd been tasked with safekeeping. Both of them overflowed with the bills of the well-intentioned Catholics. Lee swept a bit more into his main pile, scooped it up, and dropped it into the garbage can next to his loot.
These people are playing the murder song by the sounds of it. Do you mean this ain't really chilling? So yeah. Quickly before I start the video again, hit the like button down below. Let's get the 50 likes. How about hit the subscribe button? Yes, hit that subscribe button. I want to know what's going on.
The broom against the wall,
And hit the bell and
wiped
press
his
all.
forehead with his arm and turned back towards us. We were 1 step ahead of him. We both dropped well before he could have seen. All he saw through those windows was the same old picnic area with the old cemetery behind it. I prayed Diego's truck was out of sight as we'd imagined. After a few moments of silence, we gripped our crowbars tightly and slowly brought our eyes to the window line again. Diego's fingers shook and slipped on the edges of the pane. Had Lee still been looking, we would have had no choice but to rush him and create more commotion than we wanted. A very different-looking Lee was now standing in the foyer. One like we'd never seen before.
I'm sorry about that. I'm so
He looked
sorry.
towards the classroom farther down. He had his hands clasped together, his thumbs circling the insides of his palms. He He slunk along the wall towards the door, tiptoeing as if afraid to disturb anything in the empty space around him. He made his way to the door of the Sunday school classroom and gingerly brought his head to the window to peer inside. He spied on them, while we spied on him. He stayed there for a while, lifting one heel off the ground and then the other. Then someone must have seen him. He quickly jerked his head away and then crept back to the spot where he'd just been cleaning. Both Diego and I ducked again and looked at each other while under the window. "Think he saw us?" I said. "He didn't see anything." "Hope so. Enough proof for you now? Peeping Tom just got caught looking at the Sunday school girls." He glared at me. I could see his long-held frustration starting to boil over. I looked at the crowbar in my hands. I tried to imagine what it would be like to crack it down over that sicko's head. It didn't feel wrong. Not in the slightest way. Diego was first to make a move. He stood up and deliberately pulled one of the doors open. I got ready to lunge up when it squeaked, but saw no reaction from Diego. When I got up, I saw that Lee had vacated the foyer and moved into the kitchen area the next room over, the doors flapping closed behind him. The mop and broom were left leaning against the wall, the collection baskets gone. I tried to tug at Diego's shirt, but he pulled away too quickly and tiptoed as quickly as he could towards the kitchen. The bolt cutter stuffed around the back of his pants nearly fell to the floor. I had to jog to catch up. Lee was still totally unaware after we slid through the kitchen doors and crept up behind him. He stood in front of the sink, splashing waves of running water up at his face.
Okay, I'm gonna say right now, I did make a try not to laugh video. If it does say in the video that I'm gonna film thingy after, that means don't worry about that. Don't bother with that. Just ignore that comment. I'm gonna post these simultaneously. So I am technically right now I am filming this maybe a couple days later, maybe a week later. I just felt like it. And yeah, let's go back to the video.
Collection boxes had been set neatly on one of the tables behind him. Had he been caught sneaking by Father Kamazi, or even by his dad? Had he tarnished his precious Beacon family name? Soon he would tell us. That was, if Diego didn't kill him first. Lee's head perked up like an animal, aware of his predator at the very last second. He made a half turn before Diego brought the crowbar down and landed it in the area between his neck and his shoulder.
Fuck!
I pulled the sack out from under my shirt and drove to force it over his head as quickly as I could.
Jesus Christ.
Diego got a few punches in as I leaned over him, making my voice sound as rough and distorted as I possibly could. I leaned down close to his head and spoke as quietly as I could. "Not a sound. You make one scream for help and it ends for you here. Do you understand?" Lee's head nodded from under the sack. His nails scraped along the tile floor like he was trying to find some traction. Diego brought his crowbar down on his right, and I swore I could have heard the sound of bone cracking.
Oh.
We pulled him into the farthest corner of the room and out of sight from the doors. He punched wildly into empty air as we sat him up in one of the wooden kitchen chairs. He must have known. Who else could have done this to him other than two criminal delinquents who tried to force information out of him only a couple weeks before? Diego hit him a few times in the midsection with his crowbar. He recoiled, taking the blows, and screamed into the sack one last time before I punched him right in the gut as hard as I could.
This is fucked up.
The tiniest, most painful exhale escaped from under the sack. Diego took the bolt cutters out that he had around the back of his waist. He looked at me and nodded, and I knew there was no amount of anecdotal rationalization that would convince him out of what he was about to do. He put the blades on either side of Lee's pinky finger.
Oh.
I went around behind him and put one arm over his mouth and the other over his chest to keep him from squirming. I felt his mouth open wide into my hand. The sound barely went more than a couple feet. The crotch of his pants got all wet, and he struggled with whatever strength he had left inside his body.
He pissed himself.
It was a smooth motion, easier than I thought it would be. Diego pressed the handles together with all his strength, and Lee's finger cracked and bent until it was severed and laying on the floor, twitching in its own pool of blood. He thrashed harder than before. He kicked and tilted to either side so much that he pulled both of us over. On the ground, Diego punched him over and over in the chest and the head. Lee kept fighting until he was too damaged to continue. His kicks and screams became weaker. The blood still poured all over the floor and soaked the legs of our pants. It was over. Whatever wrong that Lee Beacon had done, an evil justice had been served. I pulled myself to my feet. My arm hurt so badly from the fall. I staggered by Diego, who looked like he was ready to jump back in and strike him again. Blood had gotten on the inside of my pants and up my leg. My first instinct was to pull off my mask and wipe it. If only it would have proven my biggest mistake that day. Somewhere in the pain and the adrenaline, a realization struck me. We weren't the only ones in the building.
Oh, fuck!
The Sunday school group, Father Kamazi, and even Lee's dad and some other volunteers were still in the building somewhere.
Oh, no.
I stumbled back out into the hall and looked back to the right and out the back doors. Nothing out there had changed. I could even see bits of the silver paint from Diego's truck if I looked hard enough through the shrubs. I turned back to my left, fully intending to collect Diego and starting our mad dash out the building. I stopped dead halfway around. Sarah Beacon stood outside the classroom door. She had one hand on the handle and the other clutching the skirt portion of her purple flowered Sunday dress. Two thick streams of tears rolled down her face. Her watery eyes sparkled under the fluorescent lights above. She'd seen us. She'd seen what we did to her older brother.
Fuck.
I could tell from the look she gave me. She'd witnessed something far more terrible than any young girl should ever be exposed to. She was trying her best to hold it back, but she was on the verge of breaking and crying out for everyone to hear. What would Diego do if he saw her? Surely he wouldn't be so keen to let her go. Not now that she'd seen my face. He would hurt her, take her captive. Even worse, depending on how much adrenaline he still had coursing through his veins. He might even kill her. I gestured her towards the classroom door and started to pull the mask back over my face, thinking the day would come where she would point to me as the guilty party from a courtroom stand in front of my family and half the town.
Fuck me, Dad.
I was all right with that. I had already done all the damage I was going to do that day. It was better me than her. She winced and turned the door handle. The door slammed shut behind her and echoed through the hall. I went back inside and grabbed Diego by the shoulder, and both of us ran as hard as we could all the way back out to the truck. We were out on County Line 17 and back at Diego's place in half an hour, watching the Cowboys game without anyone, except for Sarah, ever knowing. Pebbles cracked and split out from underneath my tires. The truck bobbed up and down when I pulled off the road and into the little flat behind the bushes, now 18 years overgrown. They stretched nearly as tall as some of the old trees behind the graveyard and completely blocked my sightline of the church.
Fuck.
I parked in nearly the exact same spot that Diego and I had all those years ago. I had the day of my return penciled on my calendar for longer than I could remember. I was as ready as I was ever going to be. Lee Beacon died from his injuries the day we beat him and cut off his little finger.
Shit.
There is no
that's
escaping
fucking
the fact
murder.
that never a single day will pass where he doesn't pass through my mind at some point in time. Sometimes I see his face, flushed red with mixed alcohol beverage running down the corners of his mouth. Sometimes I see his nervous face while he peered in through the window of the Sunday school classroom. Sometimes I simply picture what his face must have looked like under that sack after we struck him over and over. I opened the door and stepped onto the dirt and scattered patches of grass. I wondered how long it had been since someone had stood in that spot. Perhaps it was the police who scoured the area after being called on scene. They never traced any tire marks in the dirt back to Diego's truck, even though they arrived at the church approximately 35 minutes after we'd left. Neither Diego nor I served a single day in jail for our heinous crime. We never even dealt with the slightest bit of suspicion, nor were we on the radar in any capacity. This was due, in large part, to the fact that Lee was not the only murder victim found inside St. Augustine's Church that day.
Wait, what?
He was only one small piece to an even greater and perplexing atrocity that occurred within the holy confines of that building. The whole thing was so big, so shattering, that any trace of us would have only become an irrelevant detail in the grand scheme.
Oh no.
The South Texas heat was
You're
hard to
fucking
readjust
idiots.
to.
You guys are all idiots.
The air was
Why would you do
sticky,
that?
and I was already sweating by the time I reached the old graveyard and walked in between the tombs, not kept up, and now nearly 20 years further aged. I stopped in front of the Beacon's graves. They were the last two to be buried in the yard. Lee was 20, and Sarah only 11. They were too young to be taken from the world, both of their blood forever stained upon my hands. A surge of sadness engulfed me. I had to turn away. I had to put my hands on my knees, trying to suck in long gasps of air to slow my heart rate. I looked towards the church. Its formerly yellow bricks were chipped and browned. The windows were mostly boarded over, except for a few spots where the slats had been peeled off or cracked. The back door, the same one we'd peered inside to see Lee spy inside the classroom, had been replaced by two large steel ones, forever chained and bolted shut. Perhaps if we'd gone to prison, then I'd have the chance to make peace with myself. At least I'd be able to accept the fact that I made the conscious decision to beat Lee to death and deserved to spend the rest of my life in jail.
Yeah,
If
you
not
do,
the
you
electric
fucking
chair.
prick. Cunt.
I had a chance to save a life immediately after taking one that day. If I'd done something when I saw Sarah Beacon outside in the main foyer with my mask off and tears spilling down her face, she might still be alive. Of course, at the time, I did think I'd saved her by ushering her inside the classroom before Diego could discover that she'd seen my face. Those tears in her eyes were not brought on by witnessing what we did to her brother in the kitchen. She may not have even seen us at all. She cried because of the fate she knew she awaited inside that classroom.
Oh no.
In there,
They killed her
she
as
fell at the hands
well.
of truly evil men wearing more devilish masks than Diego and myself. The police arrived on scene, not because someone had discovered Lee's body and called them. They arrived after a tentative call had been made before we'd even pulled the truck into the spot behind the bushes. It was a seemingly harmless call about the idea of potential wrongdoing inside the classroom made by none other than Lee Beacon before we got to him. Lee wasn't guilty of what we thought he was. Quite the opposite was true.
Oh.
Lee was the one person who knew about what was really happening behind closed doors
no.
to the little girls and boys at Sunday school. He wasn't staying late to pocket donation money and make his rounds with girls underage. He was staying late, trying to stop something terrible from happening from the same men who manipulated him his entire life. It's only coincidence it all happened the same day that we came for him. All 12 children's bodies were found, strewn over the carpet of the classroom floor. Their little limbs lay at their sides or flopped over little plastic chairs. All of them showed signs of some form of physical abuse, noticeably worse in some, before ultimately dying from the same poison in their veins. A half-full pitcher of toxic fruit juice was left sitting on the teacher's desk.
Fuck.
Father Kamazi and Mr. Beacon, the two most devout members of the church, were discovered on the altar. They were later found to be responsible for what had taken place that day. They were blamed for the children's murders, as well as beating Lee to death. Spilled plastic cups of the same drink were found next to their bodies. God gave me a chance for redemption that day. I could have saved Sarah's life. Maybe I could have saved them all. Instead, I was only there for murder and fled like a coward the moment my life was in jeopardy.
Fuck.
there will be no forgiveness for me.
Hope you guys do enjoy. Please hit the like button down below, and please let's get the 50 likes today. And please hit the subscribe button and press all on the notification bell. And please comment down below what creepypasta you guys want me to do next. And I'll see you guys next time for the next video. See you guys later.